Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. In this episode, Bobby is joined by Shel Philips. Today, they're going to be talking about CIS and how you can use it to your advantage and further your progression in CMMC. We're so excited for you guys to join us in this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Well, Shel, thank you so much for joining me today. Today, we're going to be talking about CIS and how we can try to do things smartly in integrating CIS, as well as how you can try to leverage that to move further on your journey for CMMC. So first off, Shel, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Happy to be here.
So you did mention early on that you have two nicknames. I'm just curious what that story is a little bit.
Yeah. So a couple of years back, I've worn almost every hat in the MSP company that I work for, Covenant Technology Solutions, and our owner is very visionary. He's always out there finding new acorns and things to do, and typically he would get excited about a topic, and then it would sort of filter down through the company, and nobody would do anything about it. So I was the drip pan. So I would catch all the projects that came through and turn them into something. So drip pan is my first one. The second one, about 3 years ago, when we started meeting with a PAX 8 community about cybersecurity and CMMC, somebody said, we need a spreadsheet to do XYZ. And Tim, again, the owner of the company, offered me up, and he says, well, Shel will do that. And then Matt Lee says, oh, Shel is a service. So that's my second nickname.
Okay. Well, for how we met was through PAX 8, I think, peer group meeting. Is that correct? I believe. Mm-hmm. And then we started just sharing our passion that we had for CMMC as well as CIS.
Right. And
I sort of cut my teeth in compliance and security with CIS. And I was very surprised at, once I started really diving into CIS early on, how difficult that was to implement for a managed service company like mine. And Shel, you work for an MSP as well, correct?
That's correct. That's one of my hats. Yeah.
That's one of the many hats that you wear.
Yeah.
So can you kind of talk about maybe the challenges of doing security and compliance and policies and procedures for an MSP, and sort of maybe perhaps the pitfalls that they run into early on?
The absolute biggest pitfall is the number of tools that we use, whether they're hosted or they're on premises or whatever. All the add-ons, they aren't all equal in their security posture, and so you might have vulnerabilities that you're not even aware of. And that's been the biggest challenge, is trying to figure out who's got what tools, which ones work. The second part of that is if you're working in CMMC or the Department of Defense. CMMC is the cybersecurity, maturity model certification.
Yeah. Right.
CMMC level 2. The problem with that is scope. The challenge is how far out do we put our arms around all the systems and technology that we use to protect classified, controlled unclassified information, CUI. And so as you get into an MSP, we have lots of tools, we have lots of clients, and it's really hard to put your arms around a whole MSP and sort of encapsulate that and try to put that in scope. It's very difficult. Mm-hmm. So those are the two big challenges, is the number of tools and the scope of how do we do that.
Yeah, you'd mentioned when we were talking earlier about policies and procedures and how sometimes compliance and a policy can be looked at differently versus just overall health and security of the company. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's kind of a misnomer. People generally equate security and compliance together as the same thing. It's not really. They're two sides of the same security coin. I'll give you an example. It's a well-worn example. I share it every time I speak to somebody. But like your password management policy, let's say you have a password policy. You only have to have 6 characters in your password. You never have to change it, and you don't have to use MFA, multi-factor authentication. That's your policy. It's written, and you can comply to that. You can follow it strictly, but you're not secure because it's a very weak policy. Or conversely, you can write a very stringent policy that says you have to have 16 characters or a passphrase. You have to use MFA. It has to change every 90 days and so on and so forth. But if you don't comply to it or don't follow it, then you're not secure either. So the two pieces go together and they need to be distinguished. Typically, compliance is handled by a person and security is handled by technology. That's kind of the big distinction is the two pieces have to fit together.
And what I find as an MSP owner myself, and you've been in the business for, gosh, a lot of years too, that MSPs are pretty good at providing services and providing overarching security and concepts and standing on the soapbox and preaching the good news. But when it comes to compliance, you've been in a lot of the different conferences I've been, and when you ask MSPs, hey, raise your hand if you're using CIS as a framework or any particular, you could use NIST CSF, CMMCs, NIST 800-171. There's other types of frameworks that are out there, but if you ask them to raise their hand, which ones are using it, what percentage would you say would raise their hand?
Yeah, about 5%.
Yeah, not many. And then really, if you ask how much, like how deep have you gone into that framework? Have you created up, policies, procedures, and tied it together in a system security plan, which is basically a document that tells the story of how your business provides security? That number even cuts dramatically shorter. Why do you think that is for MSPs?
It's really easy to answer, Bobby. If you think about it, margins are not great in the technology business. I mean, everybody's competing. It's becoming more and more of a commodity. And so the margins aren't great. So we're always looking for shortcuts or things that can leverage our skill sets and our people. And so we find tools and we implement those tools thinking, aha, we've got a security plan in place. But really, it takes a whole collection of tools to make a full security package. Mm-hmm. And the problem is we get lazy or we don't understand, and we only do so much of that process. I would say probably on the order of 2 to 5% of all MSP, if you ask them if they have an incident response plan written. Raise your hand if you have an incident response plan written. That shows you right there. We talk about it. The shoemaker's kids have no shoes, right? Right. We can do pretty good for our clients at the end of the day, and we can fight like crazy if they get breached or have some sort of event. But to actually have the protection out front that we've applied to ourselves first, understand how it works, and then apply it to our clients, that's the breakdown.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it perfectly, Shel, from the perspective of you have an agreement, right? Let's say that you've got a client that's got 25 people and you're providing full IT services. Does full IT services mean full compliance in a framework?
Not necessarily, because you have to be really specific about what you're trying to accomplish. I typically put together a shared responsibility matrix before I engage in anything. I just say, okay, who's going to do what to whom and how and why? And they're split down, and there's 3 categories. There's the client, there's my MSP, and there's the hosted application, whoever it might be. Let's say they're in the cloud, they're in Microsoft's environment, in Azure, or they're on AWS, or wherever they might be. That entity also has responsibility in the security program. And so I just start out right there and say, okay, who's going to do what? Sometimes it's shared IT. They have their own staff. We guide and direct. Sometimes it's us 100% doing IT. Sometimes they just want a project done, and then off we go. And so you have to figure out just at the very outset, who's going to do what? Okay, once we identify that, now we can start making assignments and help people put their program together and assign a schedule for reviews and all the things that have to go into a successful security program. And it's not just technology that we click a box and now all of a sudden we're secure. You have to keep reviewing that, but also there's some procedures that really require human intervention. For example, a quick one, awareness training. You have to have somebody that's going to manage it. Risk assessment. Someone has to think through that and actually watch what's going on and think through that process. It's a human. It's not a configuration. So lots of pieces to it, and it's a strategic move. I will say, though, the strategy of doing security consulting is very profitable and lucrative. I mean, it's a green field, one, because not too many people really have the full understanding, and the profit percentages, the margins are much higher than MSP. So
Right.
why wouldn't you go there? So typically they don't have staff that's been trained. They don't have anybody dedicated full time to compliance, and they throw out a quick solution. Okay, we got antivirus, we've got offsite backups, that sort of thing. That's not the whole plan.
Yeah, when you're doing managed services for a client, let's say that 25 users like we were just talking about, when they have a need, they want somebody to fill their IT services, and you come in, you walk in the door and you say, hey, I'm going to provide full IT services and compliance with that, versus you've got another person coming in who's just going to throw some tools and do stuff like checking the boxes.
Right.
Those prices will be very different between those two. And it can be very
Yes.
challenging about how to convey that to a client to
Yes.
help them understand the difference between what you're trying to do.
Yes.
Is there some wisdom you can share about that?
Well, in order to get around that commodity pricing struggle, is we've actually gone upscale. So we do a lot of Department of Defense work. Those people know they have to have it.
Right.
It's part of their contracts, of their subcontractor contracts. They have to do it. Therefore, it kind of takes the question about how much does it cost out of the picture. Right. Typically, our pricing as a company, our pricing for consulting and actually doing the services is much lower than the average DoD consultant. Okay, so it's like I said, it's a greenfield for us, and we get most of our work by word of mouth. We aren't competing with anybody, so we don't have to say, okay, here's your base package of IT services, and plus here's your security level, and here's your compliance, and we don't have to layer it like that. We just have a per person price. Here's your price, all in, and here we go. We'll take care of licensing. We'll take care of all the processes and GPOs and all those things. And now here you go. Here's your deal.
Right. Now, when you are just strictly an MSP, I kind of equate that to like different types of food industries, right? A managed service provider can't be a compliance organization if that's what their focus is on, providing just managed services. And you have an organization like yourself that is going more into those compliance type things. You kind of have to know the lanes that you're in and really ride that lane appropriately.
Right.
But that doesn't mean MSPs just have to just throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to frameworks like CIS. And my thought is that there are, and you touched on this a little bit about having a good defined matrix. There's no reason an MSP cannot wrap their business around CIS framework themselves, right? There's going to be cost involved in that, but they can definitely assess themselves, see how well they're doing, and really go through all of those. At least I would say level 2. If you're going to be doing any type of MSP work, you really should be at least a level 2 in CIS. And if you're not really familiar with CIS frameworks, there's 3 levels.
Let's take some time and sort of expand that a little bit. First, we'll talk about the fact that there are frameworks that apply to various industries, right? There's a CJIS, the Criminal Justice Information Services. There's HIPAA, Health Information Portability and Protection Act. There is NIST 800-171 and NIST 800-53, the Department of Defense, ITAR, and those frameworks, CMMC level 2. And there's many others, 27001 ISO, there's just a whole number of them. But the point is that if you try to blindly put together a complete package without a roadmap, some guidelines, you're sort of shooting in the dark, because did you get everything? Do you have everything covered? what's missing. And so you want to pick a framework. So everybody should start with, every MSP should start with a framework, one that they can apply to themselves, drinking their own champagne. They can apply it to themselves. And then because they have the experience of applying to themselves, they can take it successfully to their clients. So let's talk about CIS 18. That used to be CIS 20 controls. It's 18 controls, 153 safeguards, and they're broken down into various categories, access control, hardware, software, every one of those sections, 18 controls, covers a topic. And within that, there are 3 implementation group levels, 1, 2, 3, as you were starting to mention. And you don't have to go get all X number in one of the controls. You don't have to get all of them completed, because you get a couple for implementation group 1, implementation group 2 and 3, and then you have them all covered. So you can wade in to application of these controls. You can wade into it over time, and as you can absorb it and complete that process. Now, many MSPs already have probably at least a handful, I would say at least 6 or 8 of the controls sort of handled. For example, they probably have Active Directory fully implemented. They probably have security groups. They probably have some process for vetting their techs and getting them qualified. They probably have some way to configure their hardware, their workstations, their laptops. They probably have antivirus and anti-malware implemented and centrally managed. They probably have, offsite backups. These are very common things, but they're whole categories within the CIS 18 framework, and they probably have a lot of those already completed. It's just a matter of going through the whole framework and saying, okay, what is it and what am I missing within those categories? And they can fill in. So it's not completely starting from scratch. A lot of people are way ahead and can make the transition. But the key thing, and why would we pick CIS 18? Well, I think it's a really good stair step into CMMC.
Right.
I think the government's going to step in at some point. I can't tell you when or how, but they're going to step in and they're going to say, here's the requirement for MSPs. You're going to have to comply to these things. And it'll be very similar to a CMMC structure, I think. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's coming in a not too distant future, 2 years, 5 years, I don't know. But the point is that if you've gone through CIS 18, you're already more than halfway there to CMMC level 2. And so it's a really good stepping stone, stair step, foundation, road on-ramp to the highway, to the cybersecurity highway, if you get that put in place. So that's why we talk about CIS 18 being so important. And there's lots of training available. One of our big vendors, licensed vendors, does a whole series of classes on CIS 18. I teach a class on how to write policies for CIS 18. And so there's a lot of help available. And the second or third point that I always make, where does an MSP start? Find a friend. That's one of our best secrets to succeeding. Finding a guy like you, Bobby, or a small group,
or someone like Shel.
You've already been through it, and so you know what you're looking at and how hard it is. And you and I have been around this neighborhood long enough that we're happy to help.
Sure.
It's not a competition. We need to get this done. We need security out there. So there's find a friend who's willing to help, and there's lots of them. Bobby can point you in a million directions. We've got I do a couple of phone calls each month that I host for cybersecurity specialists, and we kick around the topics of the month. So so get a friend.
Well, I appreciate you hitting pause a little bit on the fast forward past that, because I think that was really, we should hover a little more on that. When I was first kind of going into CIS, the biggest challenge I had was, where do I start? How do I do this? How do I get going? I didn't really know how to eat that elephant. And it was super challenging for me. And at the same time, how do I not put myself or my clients out of business by trying to implement this in a way? Because I could be the best secure organization in the world, but if I'm not making money because I don't know how to manage that process, and continue to provide good services to my client without over budgeting for tools and processes and people, right? You don't want to build this fiefdom. How do you get where you need to be without blowing everything up in the process? And that can be real challenging. And I think you touched on it, is target yourself first, and really look at how you implement. Because if investing in your own MSP or MSSP or wherever you are's internal securities first are the smartest move, and you're going to learn so much through that process as you go through to do it. Now, does that mean that you can apply all of that to a client? Probably not. But starting with that, one of the things that helped me kind of want to talk to you, Shel, is you guys have a template that is probably the best that I have seen for CIS that, to be frank, I wish I would have had when I was cutting my teeth. I didn't. I had to sort of, make my own. And boy, that would have made things a lot easier. What are some things that you would want to see in a CIS template as you're starting off for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things to know is when you're developing a system security plan, an SSP, which is the overriding document. It's the roadmap for your security plan.
The vision.
Right? It's not the detail. Those are policies and procedures, and they support that plan. But the SSP is kind of the overriding document. And something new to note, a couple of years ago when I started writing our plans for Covenant, the GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance platforms were not sophisticated. They weren't smart enough and flexible enough to handle the kinds of things that we're doing now, where we actually have to show evidence of things in place and categorize and make assignments to individuals to do things. They weren't that sophisticated. So all of my templates were written in Microsoft Word and Excel and, PDFs and that sort of thing. And so it was sort of this juggling act to keep all those documents sort of up to date and organized. And so I wrote a template while we were writing our own. We had lost the client because we were not ITAR compliant back in 2017. We were not ITAR compliant. That's 853, for international trade in firearms and sort of manufacturing. And we were not compliant because we didn't know anything about it. We were just an MSP and we were pretty good. But we lost this large manufacturing plant that was one of our customers because they'd been purchased by an Eastern firm who was big on compliance. And so my boss, again, drip pan, go figure it out. And so I wrote our policy manual along the lines of NIST 800-171. And at that time, CMMC 1.0 first version was coming out. So I got a hold of that framework and I fit that together and wrote a policy manual. Now, about 8 months later, I had to rewrite it for version 2.0, which was painful.
Yes.
But I got through that. And I figured to myself, wait a second, this was such a painful process because I wrote the whole thing word for word from scratch. It's such a painful process. Maybe I could share this as a template to somebody who is interested and who needs it, give them a foot up. And so I turned it into a template. The SSP is about a 133-page template, system security plan. And then I have about 17 or 18 supporting documents, which are policies and procedures and supporting documents off of that. Yeah, we make it available, but it was set up in a way that it's all Word documents and it's all spreadsheets, and you could modify them. You could fit them into your own circumstances. You could add in the tools that you needed to, and so on and so forth. Now, we picked the Microsoft Security Platform as our core platform. So we use, Sentinel. We only have a couple of things that we add to it, like Blackpoint Cyber, and we add Ninja RMM and Huntress. Just a couple of things. And then I've chosen a GRC to put all those things together into a platform where I can reach out and make assignments to make changes or to review or to do the things that have to be done for compliance. And so that's sort of evolved over time. But yeah, we have a set of templates that I make it available to MSPs. I sell it to clients. It fits very nicely for cities and counties within the states for CGIS coverage. It covers all the bases for CGIS. So it's very versatile and very applicable to all those circumstances.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is the template that you had for CIS is it kind of followed the CMMC NIST 800 171A and CMMC concept of a system security plan. And so what I like about that is, let's say that you go ahead and implement your CIS framework for yourself as an MSP. You absolutely should do that. You should go through, have a system security plan, start marching through how you're addressing those respective controls. I believe CIS is the best one for an MSP. That's just me personally.
I would agree. I think
go through it and start getting it lined up for how those types of things are going to be defined in your business, how you're going to do those types of organizational structures, how you're going to attack those, and you just walk all the way down. As you've gone through and done that and implemented it, those are obviously going to be addressing the 18 controls that are related to CIS. Right. But at the same time, you can do cross-mapping. So as you address some of those specific controls, they can start to be credited, if you will, to how you do the 800 171A. So for those of you who may not know, but that's the NIST standard that CMMC is based on. And you can do those cross maps to see how you're doing. Now, one of the things that is a big difference between CIS and NIST frameworks is the obviously certification requirement. I mean, they don't have certification requirements for CIS. They do for NIST for the CMMC framework. But another aspect is evidence. That is a big deal and belief for CMMC. Now, you can still have that evidence gathering for your CIS approach, but it isn't as prescriptive in that area about defining you need to have these types of evidences as you see in NIST. But they do have the requirement in CIS for reviewing, which is a big part of making sure you're always relevant, right? So those are things that I think that should happen. But as you're doing those types of things, can you talk, Shel, about how that might get you on the field to possibly attack as an MSP to go after CMMC? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Sure, absolutely. So I've done a lot of crosswalking between the various frameworks. And it turns out that CIS 18, if fully implemented through implementation group 2, not completely to the end, but through 2, it covers a little over half of the CMMC level 2 requirements or controls. Okay, there's a direct mapping to about 51, 52%. And so that's a big jump ahead to getting that completed. The things that aren't covered are around controlling CUI, controlled unclassified information. Very specific about that. And between the two frameworks, by the way, I would say CIS 18 is more prescriptive in some ways than the NIST 800-171 CMMC, because CMMC says, well, protect it. They don't say how. They don't say how to implement this, that, or the other thing. They don't say anything about DKIM or, all the little details that are brought up in CIS 18. They don't. So it's not that prescriptive, but you have to be creative and you have to demonstrate how and why you did what you did to protect that. And so it's a little more of a challenge. And that's why so many call-outs. What are the 310, 320 items that you have to be ready? You don't necessarily have to show them all, but you have to be ready to show any one of those evidences that they're there. And so that's a big requirement. But it gets you, CIS 18 gets you about 51 to 3% of the way to CMMC.
Well, I think another cool aspect is that for an MSP and an MSSP, CIS will make more sense natively to coming in and trying to address all of the controls they have.
Right.
Whereas NIST is going to be there, NIST 800, 171 and 171A, those are the two documents you have to look at. Those were born out of what Shel had mentioned, the 853. 853 is this tome of controls that are massive, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of controls that were designed to help federal government secure their infrastructure. And so they took that 853 and they boiled it down into what we know today as the 800, 171, 171A. And it's laser focused on controlled unclassified information.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see good chunks of those controls referring to that type of data. If you're not really familiar with that, it could really kind of trip you up trying to get that stuff implemented, trying to understand what that is. And that's a whole other world of tackling and blocking involved. So getting involved in CIS can really get, like what Shel's saying, you up to 50% of getting in that neighborhood, right? You're on the field. You may not be in field goal range, but you're still on the field and in play. Versus if you don't have any of that, you're like in the parking lot trying to figure out how you can scalp a ticket and get on the field.
Grilling hot dogs. Yeah, not.
It's bad. It's bad in that situation. So I think that's one of the things that's really great, that if you can get really dialed in on CIS, then you can start taking the time to start trying to understand what this CUI is all about. And start understanding the CMMC ecosystem, which is completely different than what you're used to in an MSP traditional perspective. Shel, what are some challenges about transitioning from like a CIS framework? Like, let's just say that they utilized your CIS template. How could they then go after? What are some things that you would recommend that they should do to try to then convert into getting into the CMMC space?
Very first thing is get familiar with the framework. There's lots of copies of it on the web. You can download it, take it straight from the Department of Defense. They can give it to you, and just read the 100. There's 110 controls, and while it seems like a hard task, you could probably read it in a couple of hours. Read through, get the gist of what they're saying. They use a lot of legal speak, and it can be a little bit tiresome, but you can read through it and get the sense of what they're trying to do. They're trying to tell you, okay, this is a vector. This is an attack vector. This is what you ought to do probably to protect that vector, whatever it might be. Here's some people that are users, and if you give them access to everything, then if they're compromised, a malicious actor has access to everything. So limit their access. Don't just set it and forget it. You have risk assessment. You have to go through periodically and figure that out. Roles, who does what to whom and how and why. You have to think through who's a player and how do they play. You have to talk about. See, one of the things that we miss frequently, say it's a bunch of rules for cybersecurity, but a good SSP plan also includes business strategy. It's a marriage of security strategy and business strategy. So a business, they're in the business to make money, not to do security per se. But you can marry those two things, and actually, when you're writing your policy or procedures in your SSP, it really should reflect that. In fact, the reason why we're actually limiting people's access to data is so that it won't be compromised. If it's compromised, we'll lose money, we'll have a lawsuit, and so on. Right. So you tie all those pieces together so that it's more compelling to management. And again, you can't implement a security plan unless it comes from the top and goes all the way down, right? Yeah. You've experienced that. It has to start at the top. And so to get buy-in from management, upper levels, you have to build that in and say, this is why, Mr. CEO, this is why we're doing a security plan, so that we can keep you in business, keep you efficient, keep you protected, and keep you doing what you know how to do. And so just some key pieces in writing these plans is understand what the business is trying to accomplish as well.
So true. When you're dealing with CIS or CMMC's NIST standards, one of the challenges that people talk about is people. how many bodies do you need to pull these types of things off? I feel like, just from personal experience, if you're implementing CIS for you as an MSP or MSP individually, internally, I think you don't need necessarily a specific person or a group of people to pull that off, because kind of like what you're talking about, Shel, is you as a company need to wholly believe in that. Everybody's in part of that problem and solution at the same time, and they're working together to get that done. As a company, you have to live and breathe that and start lining that up. Now, implementing that for clients, that's a whole other game. How can you provide the services that you're doing, and how can you help them? I think you, as just a traditional MSP, can provide a lot of great services and show how you align for CIS for them, but you're not crossing that compliance path, because that's a whole other ball game, like Shel's talking about, in cost. But you would definitely need to have some bodies to help you cover that with them. So I think that's where sometimes people get really in the weeds, is they're like, how can I do this for all of my clients? And the answer is, I don't know if you really can with a traditional baseline MSP solution for clients, but you can get a chunk of things done just by having a good implementation of how you guys roll it out. But then about checking all the boxes, making sure that on a daily basis, all of the frameworks are being compliant. It's not a technology solution at that point. When you're dealing with that, you need bodies that are looking at stuff, doing things, checking off, making sure that that compliance is being met. And it's just really hard to do in a traditional implementation. Would you say that's fair, or am I off base there?
I have a little bit different take on it.
Okay, yeah, I want to hear it.
Partially true, but my take is this: it depends on how bought in your users are. In other words, if the whole team says, "Yeah, we're a security company, we're focused that way, we will follow the rules and whatever," then you don't need a full-time person. But if you're like a typical MSP, the techs are off doing tech stuff, and that's what they like to do. They don't like to fill out all the documentation and jump through all the hoops. And then you would need more of a full-time person.
Right.
At my company, I'm full-time because I'm actually a consultant too. So I've built that into a whole role. And so I can do, 30% of my time focuses on our MSP. The other 60% focuses on clients and others that I'm consulting for. So it really depends on how bought in the team is. And if each one from bottom to top and from top to bottom says, yeah, we're going to follow the rules, it's important, we understand why it's important, then you don't need as much of an oversight to get that done. But if you don't have that, you have to enforce it. You have to be on it. You have to be watching everything. You have to do all the documentation, all the management, all that sort of thing. You need probably at least one FTE. Right. For your clients, I can probably run half a dozen as a virtual CISO. I can probably carry 6 or so clients and do a really meaningful job where we're monthly meeting and we're checking off stuff on the POAM, the plan of attack and plan of action and milestones, where we can actually get things done. I can probably handle 6 or 8 accounts, but if I'm really being honest, it depends on the company. It depends on the client.
Right.
Are they bought in? Are they a DoD subcontractor? Well, then there's pretty good buy-in.
That's a different type of engagement for that, for sure.
So that's my take. I
agree. I agree. I 100% agree. And we buy and subscribe to that as well. We have, I would say I ride that probably 50% of the time myself personally. And then we just brought on someone else specifically to do just like what you're talking about to do that. And there's 14 of us, so we're not a very large MSP perspective. But I think you have to have that person that is going through and looking at the reoccurring quarterly, monthly, yearly type stuff that is that's how the breaches happen. Because someone's not checking those accounts, closing those doors, making sure those types of things are, yes, you can build processes around your overall processes inside your company, but having that person that's like in the racy kind of assignment that person's going to be responsible for, I think you really do need to have that body. Yeah. So I totally agree with that. Shel, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to you joining us in our next call.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bobby.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.